So, as a beginner to the mixed media world, something that happens a lot for me is I'll sit down to work on a project and I immediately feel overwhelmed because there are so many different options for what I could do with all the different mediums and products that I have. So, I had the idea to create a little swatch sheet of all the different techniques and combinations that I could do with the Vicki Boutin product that I have. And I'm hoping that this will give me some quick way to kind of look at this and say, like, I think I want that look for this particular project. And to remind me, like, oh, I forgot what it's like when I put molding paste with, watercolor brushes or whatever. So I have art crayons, watercolor brushes, texture glazes, molding paste, and pigment powder. And these are all of the different combinations of these 5 things. So my plan is to not only create little swatches to put here on this sheet of paper to act as a guide for me, but also to get a little bit closer to the product by using my fingers. So when I saw that Artful Technique challenge, I liked it because I feel like this is a world that has intimidated me for a long time. And I think that the idea of using my fingers and getting a little bit closer to the product is going to help me to understand it a little bit more, to pay more attention to how it flows. And I think it's going to be a little bit more of a vulnerable process for me. So I'm excited to see how it goes. There were a lot of things that I noticed as I started using my fingers. And the first is how quickly the molding paste dries. So I haven't used the molding paste a ton. I did end up using a palette knife just to mix the product um, because I thought that would just make it quicker and easier. But in terms of putting it on the paper, I did use my fingers. So as I was moving it around, I noticed after a few seconds it wouldn't move anymore. And so I thought, well, that's something I didn't know before. And so that's really good information for me as I move forward with molding paste. You kind of need to make your choices and make them quickly. The other thing I liked is the way that this sort of looks like an oil pastel, as it creates that soft edge around it. So I think I'm going to do that more in the future. I really like the way that that turned out. I also felt like it was important to understand the way to mix some of these colors. So, for example, the art crayon that I used is not that color. So, when it mixes with white, it's substantially lighter. And so, when I'm picking colors in the future, that's helpful to remember. Like the crayons with the molding paste are going to be, a hue lighter. The watercolor also way lighter, which obviously if you mix it with white, it's going to be lighter, but it almost is not the color I would have predicted. So that was some good information to have. Um, the other thing that I was paying attention to is the way that the medium affects the paper. So the molding paste buckled the paper a lot more than the texture glazes. And that's also helpful to know. I mean, I use foundations paper anyway, but I might use gesso a little bit more if I'm going to use molding paste. It's probably better for thicker paper like chipboard or something like that because it can kind of hold the weight and the hardness. It gets a lot thicker. And when it comes to the pigment powder, it also helped me to remember and to pay attention to how much you have to add. You have to add a lot of the pigment powder if you want a really rich color, which I like because that means that you can always add more, but you can't take away. So that's a great way for it to be, because if you want a lighter color, that would be harder to do if it was more pigmented or thicker. Makes the spectrum of color possibilities, wider. This one was funny. These were two very dry mediums, and I thought, well, maybe I could do like kind of like a crayon chalky type thing, but it was weird. It affected the paper really weirdly. So I think I end up adding texture glaze. Let's see what I do here. I added molding paste, just a very little bit, just to get it moving, because those two really need something to kind of glue them together. But I did like the way that looked. It has like a very painty like drywall kind of a consistency, which I thought was kind of cool. I noticed when it was time to work with the texture glazes, I was excited because they just moved so much more. Oh, here I'm just doing the watercolor with the pigment, which I hadn't thought to do before, and I really liked that a lot as well. But the texture glaze is just so creamy, and especially after you've worked with the molding paste, it was like this really exciting thing to do. It also has so much shine. I really noticed the difference as I looked at them side by side on the paper. What a difference that made. I also tried to pick all pinks here because I kind of wanted to be able to compare the textures without like really stark color differences. So that's why I'm using all pinks for this page. That also had a surprising look on the paper. So I really liked experimenting with this. I feel like I learned a lot about the mediums, and getting closer to the product, I think, helped me to understand it a little bit better. So I would definitely encourage you, if you haven't done this, to do that Artful technique challenge. I'm not probably going to have time to do all 50, but I'm glad that I picked the ones I did. I loved the way that kind of lavender came out. And I tried to kind of make some patterns with my finger, but I liked that dabbing one. But I wanted to just kind of keep them straight for the purposes of this project in particular. And so then what I did with this paper is I cut it up and cut out 2-inch circles, 2-inch half circles, actually, using a Fiskars circle punch, and put them on my guide. And I also used some half circles to create a layout. And I feel like half circles they just make sense to me. I use them all the time. I just feel like they're so versatile, and they always feel fresh and fun to me. So that was the basis for this layout here. So I'm again using my daughter's clothes as inspiration for the color palette, and this time I decided to just use the finger method with the watercolor alone. And I tried flicking, I tried patting and dabbing, I tried smearing. I've seen Natalie D'Souza use kind of a flicking the paintbrush with her finger, so I tried that. And I always have tried, but I can never figure out how to pinch the end of the brush so that a little dot comes out. I tried to really saturate it there, but I just couldn't get it to work. I don't know if maybe I needed to do it on a thicker brush, because that's a pretty thin brush. But again, learning so much about, um, the medium and the way that it interacts with the paper, the drying, just all of it. And I added some gold texture glaze here, more with my finger, because I just thought it was fun. It's very therapeutic, the feeling of that creamy stuff on your finger. And I wanted to have a half gold circle here for my layout. So making a pocket page spread, and I love to have tiny little elements that add a little flair to layouts in pocket pages. And so I took this plastic sheet here, and I could have just done, this wildflower and honey decorated layout without this little insert, but I thought that it would add a little bit of fun here with these half circles. So it's a little plastic sheet, and I'm trying to think what brand it is. I don't know that I know. Cut it to 3x4 and then punched it to fit in the pocket page, and it just flips between the two pages. And I just adhered them down. You have to peel off there's like a film on top of it. But I just directly adhered the circles to the plastic on both sides. And so it's kind of like a little interactive element just between the pages that you flip through. Just adds something extra and kind of mirrors the rainbow on my daughter's shirt, which again, her clothing is always such an inspiration for me. And I love the holographic pieces from the Wildflower and Honey collection. So I did that little heart, and then the honeycomb in that. And then the packaging on the foundations paper pack is always struck me as being very beautiful. So I decided to cut it and put it underneath the story word there. I considered adding those leaves, but they just weren't speaking to me for this particular layout. So you'll see here that I pull in this transparency and kind of figured out which color I wanted to add. There was a lot of pink in the half circles, so I decided to do kind of a blue, green, yellow section of that paper. And I just used the Tim Holtz Tiny Attacher to attach it underneath this scalloped edge there, because adhering plastic can always be tricky, because some of the adhesives that I use you can see, and I can never remember which ones. I don't want to ruin it, so I just use the tiny attacher there, and then it's covered up with the ribbon. And I thought that added a really subtle, pretty technique there. So if you have the Foundations paper pack, be sure to use that rainbow acetate, because it's really, really cool. Then I just added the word news underneath. I don't know why. I thought it was cute. And then just added the date to one of the half circles there on the bottom. This is just a random story compilation about my daughter. So there's the front of the plastic and then a close-up. I love the way the gold pops there. A little bit closer up, and then the back there.